I want you to close your eyes for just a moment. Try to remember a specific sound or a fragrance from your youth. Perhaps it is the sharp, metallic ringing of a bicycle bell on a blazing summer afternoon, or the sweet, heavy scent of roasted garlic and potatoes drifting out from the neighborhood bakery on a Sunday morning. Those beautiful sensations belong to a world that seems to have quietly slipped through our fingers. Today, we are going to journey back in time to remember 20 everyday things from the 1960s, 70s, and 80s in Greece that belong in a museum now. These are not grand historical artifacts, but the intimate, everyday rituals that shaped our childhoods. And stay with me until the very end, because our final memory holds the most beautiful, touching reminder of how we used to love and protect one another in those simpler days. Before we begin our journey, let us pause to remember how time itself felt entirely different back then. Time moved slower, drifting peacefully without the frantic rush of our modern days. In that golden era, waiting was not considered a waste of time, but a beautiful, natural rhythm of life. You waited for the milk to be delivered, you waited for your favorite song to play on the radio, and you waited for your neighbors to step out onto their balconies to share the evening breeze. There is a common myth today that because we lacked modern technology and endless convenience, our lives must have been somehow poorer. But anyone who lived through those years knows the exact opposite is true. We may have had fewer material possessions, but our lives were incredibly rich in human connection, in genuine warmth, and in deep, unshakable sincerity. We were poorer in things, but infinitely wealthier in time, patience, and love for the people who shared our streets. Let us begin our journey with a sound that could make any child stop dead in their tracks on a blistering summer afternoon. Do you remember the melodic ringing of the bell from the neighborhood ice cream vendor, the pagotatsis? He did not drive a colorful truck like they do today, but pedaled a heavy white tricycle, sweating under the harsh Mediterranean sun. His small cart was an oasis on wheels. When that bell echoed through the narrow streets, we would drop our toys, abandon our games in the dirt, and run to our mothers, begging for a few drachmas. The vendor wore a crisp white apron, always smiling despite the exhausting heat. He would open the heavy metal lid of his cart, and a magical cloud of cold vapor would escape into the hot air. Inside, there were no endless extravagant flavors, just the honest, pure taste of cream, and perhaps a little chocolate, served in a simple cone or sandwiched between two plain wafers. But that taste was heaven on earth. It was not just about the ice cream, it was the ritual of waiting for him, the collective joy of all the neighborhood children gathering around his cart, comparing our treats. He knew all our names, and sometimes, if a child did not have enough coins, he would slip them a small scoop anyway, with a wink. That kind of neighborhood grace is something no modern supermarket aisle can ever replicate, and it is a sweetness that still lingers on the tongue of our memories. Before the electric refrigerator became a staple in every single Greek household, we relied on a man whose trailing was as predictable as the rising sun. The Pagus, or the Iceman, was a central figure in our daily survival during those sweltering summer months. Close your eyes and try to recall the heavy, wet thud of the massive ice blocks being unloaded from his wooden cart. He would carry these enormous, freezing blocks on his shoulder, protected only by a thick piece of burlap sack. He would use heavy iron tongs to grip the slippery ice, his hands red and calloused from the freezing cold. We would follow him like a flock of curious birds, hoping to catch a tiny, shimmering shard of ice that chipped off and fell to the hot pavement. Sucking on that little piece of ice felt like the greatest luxury in the world. He would place the block into our wooden icebox, the pagiera, which stood proudly in the corner of the kitchen. That simple piece of furniture was the heart of our preservation, keeping our milk from spoiling and our water blessedly cool. The Iceman did not just deliver frozen water, he delivered comfort, relief, and a sense of rhythm to our days. When he finally stopped coming, replaced by the hum of modern electric appliances, our kitchens gained convenience, but they lost a familiar face, a friendly morning greeting, and the comforting, rhythmic drip of the melting ice that measured the passing of our childhood summers. Now let us wander down the street, following a scent that no perfume in the world could ever match. I am talking about the Sunday morning aroma of the neighborhood bakery, the fornos, which served as the communal hearth of our entire street. In the 1960s and 70s, many homes did not have large, powerful ovens capable of roasting a large family meal, and so the Sunday roast, usually a glorious pan of lamb with potatoes heavily seasoned with lemon, garlic and oregano, was prepared at home but carried down the street to the baker. Can you picture the sight of mothers and grandmothers carefully balancing those large tin and aluminium baking pans as they walked through the neighborhood? The baker would slide dozens of these family meals into his massive wood-fired oven. When it was time to collect them, the entire street smelled like a festival of roasted garlic and potatoes. Waiting in line to retrieve your family pan was not a chore, it was a vibrant social gathering. The women would exchange news, share recipes, and catch up on the weekly gossip. We children would try to sneak a crispy, lemon-soaked potato from the edges of the pan as we carried it back home. That walk back to our dining room, with the hot pan radiating heat against our aprons, was a triumphant march. The neighborhood bakery was not just a place to buy bread, it was the fiery, beating heart of our community, baking our lives together. Let us drift into the evening, to a place where dreams were projected against the starry summer sky. The Theranos Cinema, the open-air movie theatre, is perhaps one of the most beautiful and deeply romantic institutions of modern Greek history. It was not merely about watching a film, it was an entire sensory orchestration. You walked through the unassuming entrance, usually tucked between two apartment buildings, and were immediately greeted by the intoxicating scent of blooming night jasmine and honeysuckle climbing the whitewashed walls. The ground was often covered in gravel that crunched softly under our shoes. Families, young couples, and groups of friends would sit in slightly uncomfortable director chairs, armed with ice-cold bottles of local orangeade and paper cones filled with roasted pumpkin seeds, or passatempo, as we called them. As the black and white film began to roll, accompanied by the distinct mechanical clicking of the projector, you could look up and see the stars shining brighter than the actors on screen. Sometimes, people looking down from their balconies next door would watch the movie with us. We shared our laughter, our tears, and the quiet magic of the summer breeze. It was a communal dreaming space. Today, multiplex cinemas offer perfect sound and air conditioning, but they can never offer the smell of jasmine, the taste of roasted seeds, and the gentle kiss of the Mediterranean night wind on your cheek. If you listen very closely to the silence of your memories, you might just hear the distant nostalgic chiming of a laterna echoing through the concrete canyons of the city. The laterna, that beautifully ornate hand-cranked barrel piano, was the soundtrack of an entire era. The men who operated them were not just musicians, they were wandering storytellers who carried the soul of the city on their weary shoulders. Their instruments were meticulously decorated with faded photographs of famous actresses, colourful beads, and small pieces of embroidered fabric, looking like travelling altars of joy. As the man turned the heavy iron handle, the complex machinery inside would pluck the strings, releasing a cascading melody of traditional rembetika or popular Old World waltzes. People would step out onto their balconies, tossing down coins wrapped tightly in small pieces of paper, watching them flutter to the street below like falling leaves. The laterna player would bow, unwrap the coin, and continue his melancholic, beautiful tune. It brought a spontaneous pause to our busy days. The laterna demanded that we stop whatever we were doing, step outside, and share a moment of musical beauty with our neighbours. Those delicate metallic notes spoke of romances, of hardships, and of a shared cultural heartbeat that slowly faded away, replaced by the isolating noise of traffic and portable radios. Let us step inside the house now and look around the living room. It is impossible to remember a Greek home from the 1960s or 70s without immediately thinking of the semidakia. These were the delicate, intricately hand-crocheted doilies that our mothers and grandmothers spent countless hours creating. They were absolutely everywhere. They rested on the arms of the sofa, they sat proudly in the center of the dining table, they draped over the bedside tables, and most famously, they even covered the bulky, wooden television sets. We used to joke that if something stood still long enough, our grandmothers would place a semidaki on it. But these were not just decorative pieces of lace. They were a profound expression of care, a testament to the endless patience and artistry of the women who raised us. Every single stitch held a thought, a prayer, or a conversation shared over afternoon coffee. The young girls were taught to crochet them for their dowry, their pricker, preparing for a future home they had not yet built. Today, minimalist interior design has stripped our living rooms of these delicate, snowy white webs. We see bare wood and cold glass, which may look elegant, but it lacks the warmth and the soul of a home where every surface was lovingly touched and adorned by the hands of a mother, turning a simple room into a true sanctuary. Let us wander back to the crisp mornings of our youth, specifically to the schoolyard. If you grew up in this era, you definitely remember the absolute uniformity of the school attire, the classic blue podia. This simple blue pinafore, with its stiff, bright white collar, was the great equalizer of our generation. Whether you came from a wealthy family or a poor one, once you stepped through those iron school gates, you were dressed exactly like the child standing next to you. The boys wore simpler versions, but the girls had the classic smock, meticulously ironed by mothers every Sunday evening. I can almost smell the starch and the steam from the heavy iron. Pinning that crisp white collar on Monday morning felt like putting on a gentle armor for the week ahead. We complained about them, of course. We thought they were unfashionable and restricting, and we could not wait to tear them off the moment we got home to play in the streets. But looking back, there was a profound sense of belonging in that sea of blue. It removed the superficial pressures of fashion and status, allowing us to just be children, students, equals in the eyes of our teachers and peers. The day the blue podia was abolished, we gained our individual styles, but perhaps we lost a tiny, beautiful piece of our collective identity, a thread of solidarity that bound our generation together. Venture with me now to the corner of the village square, or the busy city intersection, where the traditional cafeneo stood as the undisputed parliament of men. This was not a modern coffee shop where people sit silently staring at glowing screens. This was a place of vibrant, loud, and passionate life. As you approached, the first thing you heard was the aggressive, rhythmic clack of backgammon pieces, the tavli slamming against wooden boards, accompanied by triumphant shouts and groans of defeat. And underneath it all, the continuous, soothing click-clack of the komboloi, the worry beads, slipping through weathered fingers. The cafeneo was a sanctuary where a small cup of potent, muddy Greek coffee, boiled slowly over hot sand, could last for 4 hours. It was a space for intense political debates, for sharing news from the distant relatives in Australia or Germany, and for silent companionship. The air was thick with the smell of unfiltered cigarettes and roasted coffee beans. The men sitting there, with their worn caps and rough hands, were the living archives of our history. They knew everything about everyone, yet there was a deep, unspoken loyalty among them. The modern cafes of today are bright and beautiful, but they simply do not hold the heavy, comforting weight of time and deep-rooted brotherhood that stained the wooden chairs of the old cafeneo. Let us honor a memory that speaks of the sheer physical endurance of the women in our families, the ritual of washing clothes by hand in the scaffy. Before the magical hum of the automatic washing machine became a household staple, laundry day was a monumental, exhausting event that dictated the rhythm of the entire week. The scaffy was a large, corrugated metal or stone washtub, usually situated in the courtyard or on the balcony. Our mothers would boil enormous pots of water on the stove and carry them out, creating a cloud of warm steam in the morning air. They would use rough bars of green olive oil soap, which had a very distinct, earthy smell that meant cleanliness to all of us. I can still see their hands, submerged in the sudsy water, scrubbing relentlessly against the ribbed surface of the tub, their knuckles turning red from the hot water and the friction. It was back-breaking work, yet they often did it while singing old folk songs or chatting over the balcony railings with the neighbour who was doing the exact same chore. When the bright white sheets were finally hung on the clothesline, catching the Mediterranean wind and the brilliant sunshine, it was a profound victory. We sleep on softer linens today, washed with the push of a single button, but they never quite carry the scent of that green soap, the sunshine, and a mother's fierce devotion. Now, let us step out into the neighbourhood streets, to the unpaved, empty lots we affectionately called the Alana. For the children of the 1960s and 70s, the Alana was our kingdom, our coliseum, and our greatest classroom. We did not have supervised playdates or structured extracurricular activities. We had the dusty ground, a battered leather ball if we were lucky, and an absolute, intoxicating freedom. From the moment school ended until the streetlights flickered on, we belonged to the neighbourhood. We played complex games of marbles, drawing circles in the dirt, our knees perpetually scraped and covered in dust. We played hide and seek in half-built construction sites, completely fearless. The entire neighborhood was a safe zone, watched over by a network of grandmothers sitting on their balconies. You could not get away with any mischief because someone's aunt or mother was always watching. And when dusk fell, a symphony of voices would ring out from the windows, mothers calling out our names to come inside for dinner. We would drag our tired, depressed bodies home, our hearts full of adrenaline and joy. The Alanas have all been paved over now, replaced by concrete apartment blocks and parking lots. Children play indoors behind closed doors, safe but isolated, missing the wild, beautiful community of the dirt lot where we learned how to be brave and how to be friends. Listen closely, and you might remember another travelling merchant who brought a touch of danger and excitement to our sleepy afternoons. The Aconiaris, the wandering knife sharpener, was a fascinating character who commanded the attention of the entire street. You knew he was coming long before you saw him, thanks to his booming, melodic voice calling out, announcing his services to the housewives. He pushed a strange, wonderful contraption, a wooden cart that was part bicycle, part heavy machinery. When a mother brought down her dull kitchen knives or heavy fabric scissors, he would set to work, and the magic would begin. He would pump a pedal with his foot, spinning the large, rough grinding stone at incredible speeds. When he pressed the dull steel against the spinning stone, a brilliant, terrifying shower of bright orange sparks would fly into the air. We children would stand in a circle, mesmerized by the firework display happening right on our sidewalk, warned strictly by our mothers not to step too close. He brought life back to the tools that fed us and clothed us. It was an era when things were fixed, repaired, and sharpened, rather than simply thrown away and replaced. The Aconiaris represented a deep respect for our possessions, teaching us that with a little effort and a shower of sparks, even the dullest things could be made sharp and useful again. Let us look at a peculiar object that used to sit proudly in the hallway of many homes, the rotary dial telephone equipped with a small, shiny padlock. In those days, having a landline was a significant luxury, something families waited months or even years for the National Telecommunications Company to install. Because it was such a prized and expensive utility, the phone was treated with extreme reverence. It usually rested on its own dedicated little table, often resting upon a handmade crochet doily, naturally. But the most distinct feature was the small lock inserted directly into the dialing wheel, usually blocking the number 1 or 2, making it impossible to rotate the dial and make a call. Why? Because long-distance calls were incredibly expensive, and mothers wanted to ensure that no neighborhood child, visiting cousin, or even a talkative teenager could rack up a massive bill while they were not looking. Making a phone call was a deliberate, planned event. You had to ask for the key, unlock the device, and carefully spin the heavy dial for each digit, listening to the satisfying mechanical whir as it returned to its resting place. We did not text thoughtlessly all day long. We spoke when it mattered, and we chose our words carefully because time was literally money. The locked telephone made human voices precious and communication a deliberate act of connection. Let us invite a beautiful aroma into our memory now, the sweet, syrupy scent of boiling fruit that announced the making of gliko tukutalio, the traditional spoon sweet. This was not merely a dessert, it was the ultimate gesture of Greek hospitality, a welcoming ritual offered to every single guest who crossed the threshold of our homes. Our mothers and grandmothers would spend days preparing this delicacy, using whatever fruit was in season, sour cherries, tiny green bitter oranges, figs, or even rolled up peels of bergamot. The process was a labor of intense love and patience. The fruit had to be painstakingly peeled, sometimes pricked with needles, boiled, and steeped in sugar syrup until it reached the perfect, glowing translucence. When visitors arrived, out came the finest crystal tray. Upon it sat a tall glass of icy cold water, surrounded by tiny, delicate glass plates, each holding a single shining piece of fruit submerged in a thick, fragrant syrup, alongside tiny, ornate spoons. You would take a bite of the intensely sweet fruit, immediately followed by a long sip of the freezing water. It was a perfect contrast, a dance of temperatures and tastes. Offering a spoon sweet was a way of saying, "I have spent my time to make your arrival sweet." It was a slow, graceful form of hosting that packaged fruit from the garden in store-bought jars could never possibly replace. Quench your thirst now with a memory from a time when even a simple sip of orangeade felt like a major occasion. I am talking about the iconic glass bottles of local sodas like Epsa, Ivy, or Lou, which defined the taste of our childhood summers. We did not have giant plastic bottles in the refrigerator at all times. A soft drink was a rare treat, usually bought from the neighborhood periptero, the kiosk, or enjoyed at a local taverna on a Sunday. Do you remember the sheer physical weight of that ribbed glass bottle in your small hand? The glass was thick, designed to be washed and reused hundreds of times. The kiosk owner would pop the metal cap off with an opener mounted to the side of his booth, and the sharp, fizzy hiss was music to our ears. We would drink it slowly, savoring every single drop of that incredibly sweet, brightly colored liquid, trying to make the moment last as long as possible. And when we were finally done, we did not throw the bottle in the trash. We returned it to the shopkeeper for a small deposit, or left it in a wooden crate, understanding instinctively that things had value and should be returned to be used again. Those glass bottles held more than just a drink. They held the anticipation of a rare reward, teaching us to deeply appreciate the small luxuries that modern abundance has made mundane and entirely forgettable. Let us turn on the radio now and step into the bedroom of a teenager in the 1970s or 80s, surrounded by a mountain of plastic cassette tapes. Before we had the entire world's music catalogue at our fingertips, acquiring your favorite song was a thrilling game of patience and timing. We would sit by the stereo for hours, fingers resting anxiously on the play and record buttons simultaneously, listening to our favorite local radio station. We waited through all the talking, the weather reports, and the commercials, hoping the DJ would finally play that one specific track. And when he did, we slammed the buttons down, praying he would not talk over the intro or cut the ending short. We made mixtapes with incredible dedication, handwriting the track lists on the tiny cardboard inserts with immense care. These cassettes were our most prized possessions, gifted to friends or nervously handed to crushes to express feelings we were too shy to speak aloud. Sometimes we would even call the station from a payphone, requesting a song and dedicating it to someone special, hoping they were listening at exactly the right moment. The hiss of the tape, the occasional tangled ribbon that we had to carefully rewind with a pencil, these imperfections made the music ours. We worked hard for our soundtracks, and because of that, every single lyric and melody meant the absolute world to us. Now, take a stroll down memory lane to a shop that smelled of rich spices, salted cod, and freshly cut yellow cheese. This was the realm of the Impacalese, the traditional neighborhood grocer, long before the cold, fluorescent aisles of the massive modern supermarkets arrived. The Impacalico was a small, tightly packed room with sacks of legumes on the floor and heavy wheels of cheese resting on the counter. The grocer wore a long beige or white coat and knew every family's business, preferences, and secrets. But the most important item in his shop was not for sale. It was a small, well-worn notebook, the tefterie. In an era when cash was tight and paychecks were modest, families bought their daily necessities on credit. The grocer would carefully write down a loaf of bread, a block of feta, and half a kilo of olives in his tefterie under your father's name, and the bill would be settled at the end of the month. It was an entire economy built purely on mutual trust and absolute honor. He knew when a family was struggling and would often sneak an extra piece of chocolate to a child, pretending it was a mistake. The Umpakales was not a businessman trying to extract every penny. He was a vital pillar of the community, an extended family member who held our trust in his little notebook, providing a sense of security that no automated checkout machine could ever understand. Reach deeply into your pockets now and try to remember the comforting, heavy weight of the old Greek currency, the beloved drachma. Long before the sleek, standardized euro coins unified the continent, our money was a tactile piece of our history and our national identity. I am thinking specifically of those beautifully designed coins, like the large silver-colored 20 drachma coin, or the older, fascinating ones that actually had a hole punched right through the center. The drachma coins had a distinct metallic smell and a satisfying weight that made you feel like you were holding something of true substance. We would trace our fingers over the deeply engraved profiles of ancient philosophers, mythological heroes, and modern kings. Giving a child a 10 or 20 drachma coin for their name day was a major event. We would grip it tightly in our sweaty palms, feeling incredibly wealthy, plotting how many ice creams or comic books it could buy. The sound of drachmas jingling in a pocket, or the heavy slap of the coins hitting the wooden counter of the kiosk, was the daily soundtrack of commerce. When the drachma was retired, we gained economic convenience and European integration, but we lost a unique physical connection to our heritage, an everyday masterpiece of art that we carried in our pockets and passed from hand to hand. Let us embrace the morning rush for a moment and seek out a breakfast ritual that fed the working class for generations. I am picturing the coulouris, the man who sold the traditional sesame bread rings, standing at busy bus stops and outside train stations at the very break of dawn. He did not have a fancy modern food cart or a glass display case. Instead, he carried a massive flat wooden tray, expertly balanced on his head or resting on a portable wooden folding stand. The tray was piled high with perfectly round, golden brown kalouri, completely coated in toasted sesame seeds. As commuters hurried by in the chilly morning air, they would toss a few small coins onto his tray and grab a warm, crunchy ring without ever breaking their stride. The smell of the toasted sesame in the crisp morning air was intoxicating. For many workers, students, and hurried mothers, this cheap, simple, and incredibly nutritious bread was the only breakfast they had time to eat. The kalouri seller was a symbol of honest, hard work, standing there in the rain, the bitter cold, and the blazing heat. The simple act of buying a kalouri from his wooden tray connected us to the soil, to the bakers, and to the shared hustle of the city. A brief exchange of warmth and nourishment before facing the demands of a long, unpredictable day. Let us drift further back to the quietest hours of the morning, when the streets were perfectly still and the only sound was a rhythmic, metallic clinking breaking the silence. This was the arrival of the Galaters, the neighborhood milkmen. In the 1960s, long before ultra-pasteurized cartons lined smoother shelves, fresh milk was delivered directly to your doorstep. The milkman would often arrive with a donkey or a horse-drawn cart, and later on, a loud, sputtering motorcycle, carrying heavy metal churns or wire crates filled with thick glass bottles. Our mothers would leave empty, washed bottles on the marble steps outside our front doors the night before, often with a few coins tucked underneath. The Galaters would collect the empties and leave behind bottles filled with fresh, rich, unhomogenized sheep or cow's milk. The highlight for any child was seeing the thick layer of pure cream resting at the top of the bottle, which mothers would carefully skim off to use in sweets or to spread on warm bread with a little sugar. The milkman was a guardian of the dawn, a man we rarely saw awake, but whose quiet service nourished our growing bodies. The disappearance of the Galaters marked a shift toward convenience, but it took away a beautiful, silent communion between the provider and the home, breaking a chain of profound local trust. For our final memory, let us settle down in a place of rest, connection, and profound wisdom. I want to talk about the pangaki, the simple neighborhood bench, usually situated under the shade of a large plane tree or just outside the local church. This was not merely a piece of municipal furniture, it was the ultimate social network of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. As the intense heat of the afternoon broke and the sun began to set, the older generation, our beloved grandmothers and grandfathers, would emerge from their homes and claim their spots on the pangaki. They would sit shoulder to shoulder, holding their canes or their worry beads, watching the children play in the square and keeping a vigilant eye on the passing world. The bench was where stories were shared, where grief was collectively comforted, and where the history of the neighborhood was preserved and passed down. If you needed advice, you went to the bench. If you wanted to know who had married or who had passed away, the bench held all the answers. It was a space where the elderly were never isolated, never locked away in quiet rooms staring at televisions, but were actively engaged as the respected elders of the street. Today, we have digital timelines and social media groups, but nothing will ever compare to the real, beating heart of the community that pulsed warmly upon those weathered wooden slats of the neighborhood bench. As we reach the end of our journey today, it becomes remarkably clear that what we truly miss is not the physical objects themselves. We do not just miss the heavy drachma coins, the wooden ice boxes, or the rough olive oil soap. What we ache for is the profound sense of time, the golden days of our youth, and that unbreakable bond of genuine connection we shared with one another. We miss a time when a neighborhood was a true family, and a simple gesture of offering a spoon sweet meant the whole world. If these memories brought a warm smile to your face, or perhaps a gentle tear to your eye, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video. It truly helps us keep these precious memories alive. Now, I want to ask you a question. Which of these beautiful rituals from your childhood do you long for the most today? Please tell me your personal story in the comments below and let us remember those magical days together.